made Nazi soldiers fight for days without sleep or hunger? The answer: Pervitin, a drug that turned them into relentless war machines. Hey there! Welcome to Histox. Get ready to uncover a chilling part of history together. In the late 1930s in Germany, just before World War II began, a pharmaceutical company called Temmler was working on a new drug. In 1937, they released a small white pill called Pervitin. It seemed harmless, a little pill that you could buy at any pharmacy without a prescription. But inside that pill was something extremely powerful: methamphetamine hydrochloride. Essentially, it was crystal meth, but legal. Methamphetamine wasn't new. It was first created in Japan in 1893 and later made into pill form in the 1910s. But Temmler's version, Pervitin, was the one that really took off. They marketed it as a kind of everyday pep pill in Germany. Advertisements promised increased energy, confidence, alertness, and even weight loss. People used it to stay awake at work, concentrate in school, or just feel better. It became especially popular among housewives, students, and factory workers. You could walk into any German pharmacy and buy a pack. Soon, the Nazi military took notice. They saw how Pervitin made people feel less tired, more focused, and fearless. They thought, what if our soldiers took this in battle? They began testing it, and soldiers who took Pervitin didn't need sleep, didn't feel hungry, and could march for miles and fight harder than before. They didn't hesitate or break down under stress. It was like flipping a switch. Suddenly, men were operating like machines. The German military was so impressed, they made it official. By 1939, Nazi high command began mass-producing Pervitin for the army. Temmler was instructed to scale up production, and soon, the pill was being handed out during training and combat missions. Military doctors thought it was the ultimate performance enhancer. Medical papers and Nazi journals praised Pervitin for increasing soldiers' fighting spirit and willingness to take risks. By April 1940, when Germany was preparing to invade France, Pervitin was fully integrated into their war strategy. Military pharmacists distributed 35 million tablets to soldiers just for that campaign alone. Soldiers would pop 2 or 3 pills and go without sleep for 2 or 3 days. Some marched over 50 kilometers without rest, while others drove tanks for hours with perfect focus. Pilots flew missions while totally wired. It gave the Nazis a temporary edge. There's even a famous quote from a German army doctor who said, "Our secret weapon isn't a tank, it's a pill." The pill was cheap, easy to carry, and worked fast. Pervitin became known as Stuka Tabletten, named after the Stuka dive bombers, and Go pills. Soldiers nicknamed it Panzer Schokolade, tank chocolate, because sometimes it was mixed into candy or chocolate to make it easier to consume. The Nazis had a battle strategy called Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. The idea was simple: hit fast, hit hard, and overwhelm the enemy before they had a chance to react. Tanks, planes, and foot soldiers were used to smash through borders quickly. But this kind of war needed a special kind of soldier. Someone who could go for days without sleep, push through pain, and move like a machine. And that's where Pervitin came in. Tank crews would take a few tablets and stay awake for 3 or 4 days straight. Luftwaffe pilots, especially bomber crews, flew long missions across Europe while high on meth. Some flew for 8 to 10 hours, dropped bombs, then turned around and flew back. On the ground, it was just as intense. Infantry troops marched for 36 hours or more without rest, carrying heavy gear, moving through forests, snow, or mud, and still had the energy to fight. Some covered over 80 kilometers in 2 days. A lot of this happened during the invasion of France, notably in May 1940, during the push through the Ardennes forest. The French didn't expect the Germans to cross there, thinking it was too difficult. But the Nazis defied expectations and did it fast, catching the British and French troops by surprise. Most of those Nazi soldiers hadn't slept for days. They were kept going by a steady supply of meth. However, the drug had a dark side. After the high came the crash. Once Pervitin wore off, the effects were brutal. Soldiers would suddenly feel dizzy, paranoid, and weak. Some collapsed in the middle of battle, unable to move. Others became aggressive and confused. A few even experienced hallucinations, thinking they were being hunted or surrounded when nothing was there. Entire squads had to be pulled from the battlefield because the crash hit them all at once. By late 1940, military doctors started noticing the side effects. They reported cases of addiction, psychosis, and severe emotional breakdowns. But even then, the army continued using it because it worked in the short term. Meth didn't just make Nazi soldiers faster or stronger. It may have made them more violent, more heartless, and even more ruthless. Particularly within the SS, the group responsible for the worst crimes of the war. The Schutzstaffel SS was not just a military group. They were deeply loyal to Hitler, trained to obey without question, and tasked with executing the most inhumane acts, including managing the death camps. There's strong evidence that many SS members were addicted to meth, along with morphine and other opioids. This combination created a deadly cocktail. Meth made them alert and aggressive. Morphine made them numb and emotionless. Together, these drugs helped them carry out acts of pure brutality without hesitation. At concentration camps like Auschwitz, Dachau, and Majdanek, doctors used prisoners as human guinea pigs, injecting them with meth to test how long someone could survive without sleep or food. Some were pushed until their hearts stopped beating. In one horrific experiment in Dachau, prisoners were frozen to test how long they could survive. Meth was given to them to extend their endurance. Others were starved while high to see if the drug could keep them alive longer, though most died in agony. The SS officers themselves were so deep into drug use that they lost touch with reality. There were cases where SS guards hallucinated, screaming at shadows or imagining that prisoners were planning attacks. One SS guard at Majdanek reportedly shot multiple prisoners because he thought they were whispering in his head, though they weren't saying anything. It was the meth talking. Another officer was seen shaking violently, unable to stand, before suddenly going into a rage and beating a prisoner to death. Witnesses described him as foaming at the mouth, likely suffering from a drug-induced breakdown. By 1943, the drug abuse in the SS had gotten so bad that Nazi leadership began to take notice. Internal reports described officers as unstable, unpredictable, and, in some cases, completely insane. They weren't just following orders anymore. They were acting out in wild personal acts of violence. But by that point, it was too late. The Nazi high command tried to slow down the use of Pervitin, especially in the SS, but the damage had already been done. These men were addicted, and their minds were falling apart. It's easy to assume that the cruelty of the Nazis was purely ideological. But drugs played a major role. Meth didn't cause the hate, but it likely removed whatever thin line was left between orders and total savagery. It gave them the energy, focus, and rage to carry out acts that no normal person could endure for that long or with that level of brutality. Even Hitler himself was heavily involved with drugs. Hitler didn't just give drugs to his soldiers, he was taking them regularly. His personal doctor, Theodor Morell, acted as his drug supplier, administering powerful mixtures several times a day. These included methamphetamine, along with opioids like Eucodol, and other substances such as cocaine-based treatments for his throat, caffeine, glucose shots, and even bull semen extract to boost his stamina. By 1944, Hitler's health had seriously deteriorated. His body was falling apart from the constant drug use, and he became paranoid, untrusting, and erratic. Many historians believe his unstable thinking during the last years of the war was influenced by the drugs he was taking. He spent most of his time hiding in the Führer bunker, surrounded by loyalists and still receiving daily injections from Morell. By the time of Hitler's death in April 1945, he was a physically and mentally broken man. The entire Nazi leadership, much like Hitler, had fallen into a spiral of chaos and drug dependence. They were living in a world of lies and delusions, driven in part by the drugs that kept them going. The story of Nazi meth doesn't end with the fall of Germany. After the war, Pervitin didn't disappear. It was repackaged and sold in the United States in the 1950s and 1960s as Obitrol, a weight loss pill, and eventually became known as Adderall, widely used today to treat ADHD. The roots of modern amphetamine-based stimulants trace back to the same compounds that fueled the Nazi war machine. Some of the Nazi doctors involved in these experiments weren't punished. Instead, many were quietly recruited by both the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War to work on military projects. Their knowledge of drugs contributed to later military drug programs. Ultimately, the drugs weren't the root cause of the Nazi regime's horrors. The ideology was, but meth acted as fuel for the fire, making their war machine faster, more aggressive, and harder to stop. So, what do you think? How much did drugs play a role in the horrors of World War II? If you found this story fascinating, like and subscribe to give us a boost on Histox.